So how should you structure your affairs? Should you keep everything in your own name, or should you do something a little bit more fancy, like a trust or a foundation or something more convoluted? Warren Ingram is a certified financial planner. At what point do we start considering structures, Warren, which is a very fancy way of saying putting money in different places, just not in your own name?
I think it's one of those things that we all have to pay tax, and many of us are happy to pay fair tax. What we don't want to do is pay unnecessary tax, and it's usually an obligation on the one side, but on the other side, a right to not overpay, and so it becomes a bigger issue when you start to build up significant amount of money, and especially when you have offspring and you're worried about the money going from your name, so from one generation to the next. If there is not much money to go to the next generation, you're not too worried. The moment the asset size starts to increase, it becomes a real concern. You don't necessarily want a child of 15 inheriting an enormous amount of money and no controls around that. And that's where, a structure like a trust, could become very valuable. If you're doing it for the purpose of making sure that intergenerational transfer of money works, then and it works efficiently and safely, then it's a very good idea. If you're simply doing it to not pay tax, you're probably wasting your time.
So the benefits then of having a structure where you might be, if you're the Rockefellers, the Oppenheimers, or anybody else with a storied family name, where you've created an enterprise that has generated billions of family wealth, and you want to ensure that 10 generations from now there's still, I don't know, a bursary in your name somewhere, and that your descendants treat you with reverence, then I suppose there is an argument for it. But there's got to be a level at which it's not worthwhile to do, Warren. And I think a lot of people get talked into doing complex structures simply because it makes the lawyers and the accountants and everybody else a lot of money.
So I agree with that, and I think the only time I've seen it really work for someone who doesn't have a lot of money to have a structure, have a trust or a foundation, is when they're early founders or very early investors in an extremely high growth business. Then putting that high growth business into a trust or into a foundation or a company, that makes an enormous amount of sense. You obviously have to be very sure that that business is on the path of growth. Then do it. For the rest of us, don't worry too much about it, and go and pay a tax advisor who's not going to set up trusts, who doesn't make a living from doing that. Go and pay them to do a review of your stuff to see whether it's worthwhile. Most of the time, for most of us, not really worth it. A good will suffice.
The last person to ask whether or not you should start a trust is probably a lawyer or somebody who works in a trust company, because their job is to do things that are complicated. Go to the expert in this particular matter, who is your tax advisor, and say, at what point might I be considering, because I'm earning lots of money, my company's, my share portfolio has grown, whatever it might be, at what point do I put these assets into a structure that protects them, because I'm worried that little Johnny, might not be able to look after himself, or whatever the case might be.
Exactly right, and I think if you want an action in this situation, do some reading, because there will be some great articles out there about the amount of money that that you have before it becomes viable for a trust, and yes, some of them will be written by the very same lawyers we've just spoken about, but there'll be some written by high quality experts as well. And once you've read a few articles, you'll get a very good idea of whether it's something you should be worrying about, or whether you should put your head down and just keep building the money so that you have a money problem in the future.
Warren Ingram is a certified financial planner. I'm Bruce Whitfield. This is the Financial Freedom Pod.